All right, friends. You know that on the Spicer Speaking podcast, there's this certainly an appreciation for the coalescence of sport and society. And these days in golf, it's not just golf fans or golf readers that are hearing or more interested about the sport. The game is certainly going beyond the sports pages and the golf pages to find front pages. And again, to use that word coalescence again, very interesting times. No better guy to discuss it with than Bob Harig. You can read his work, of course, at si.com. Morning Read. Follow him at Bob Harig on Twitter. I also want to tell you a little bit. We'll get into this. His new book, which just came out, seems like perfect timing for Tiger and Phil, golf's most fascinating rivalry. Bob, you've been well traveled of late. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Judd. Happy to do it. Appreciate you having me.
Certainly want to talk, namely, about this week's 122nd playing of the U.S. Open in Brookline, Massachusetts, where you are right now. But since you just came back from London, would be remiss not to ask you about your experience at Live Golf. Enjoyed reading your work at si.com. And it kind of scared me a little bit, Bob, to hear you, or rather read your impressions that the golf tournament at its base, along with the pomp and circumstance that was part of it, was actually a legit golf tournament. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I don't know if others will view it that way when it's a 54-hole shotgun event. But where I'm coming from is when you got past all the bells and whistles and you watch them hit shots. I mean, it wasn't goofy golf. It wasn't putt-putt. It was real golf on a golf course that wasn't set up that easy and had some tough conditions, windy conditions a couple days. I've likened it to if you tune in sometimes on Golf Channel to early morning European tour coverage, and it had the same look and feel. Sometimes you look at a hole and there's not a single spectator out there. Now that's kind of how it was for parts of Thursday, the first day. Now they had nice, modest crowds around the tees and some of the greens, the 18th hole, the first hole, some of the closing holes. And by Saturday, the last day, they actually had a very good crowd. I mean, now it's the weekend, people are off of work, but it looked like a golf tournament. If you didn't know, if you just got parachuted in there and didn't know who's backing it and all the controversy surrounded by it, you'd think it was a real golf tournament. You might be a little surprised there were so few players, but that part of it is normal. They're going to play by USGA and RNA rules. There's not going to be mulligans. There's not going to be do-overs or anything like that. All that part of it is the same.
I think there was certainly a part of me, and I don't think I'm alone in this respect, that was kind of hoping they would famously flop, like forget the flag sticks or something, putting on their first golf tournament. But from what you saw and felt and experienced, sounds like the tournament itself, the way that it was organized, things of that nature. Obviously, there were some differences in setup and play, but it was at its base of what could, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a well-run golf event at Live.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a couple of growing pains, but you got to remember they pulled this thing together in like 10 weeks. In late March, they had to pivot to this new Live Golf Invitational Series. They were not planning to play this event in London. They had a different international series event scheduled for the same week. They juggled that. They moved this tournament in there. PGA Tour events, that's a year-round proposition to run them. When a new title sponsor comes on board and you're given less than 6 months, it's hell-raising time to get that thing off the ground properly. There's just so much to do that people don't understand. These guys did it in 10 weeks. They got a golf course set up, they got the staging, all the logistics. They had to get hotels. They took care of the travel for all the caddies. I'm guessing with the players, there was some of that too. All their officials, setting up the media. There was a media center that looked just as normal as any media center I've ever been in. So they had a lot to do and they pulled that off. Could there be some things better? I mean, certainly I'm sure they're going to make the broadcast better. That was the first time out of the gate too. That is hard to do. So from that standpoint, I give them credit. It had the look and feel of a golf tournament and you wouldn't have really necessarily known that they had a lot to pull off in a short period.
No shortage of controversy and discussion points. We've obviously heard a lot about the players. I feel comfortable calling them defectors. We've read about the egregious sums of money. I mean, Charles Schwartzel, nearly $5 million for his 3-day efforts, which is just an unthinkable amount. This is what worries me. I want to get your thoughts on this. Was a player that wasn't there yet, and that's Bryson DeChambeau. Obviously, a lot of the players in the London field, Bob, were guys who are past their PGA Tour primes or are shouldering past their primes, like Dustin Johnson or Sergio Garcia, some of those players. Bryson DeChambeau concerns me for a few different reasons, and he will appear at the debut domestic event at Pumpkin Ridge at the end of the month. He's an American guy. He is in his prime. He's been on international teams. He's got a major championship. This is not the type of player that the PGA Tour obviously wants or perhaps can afford to lose too many of. I mean, to me, that's the name that jumps out that is really concerning. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. That's a guy in his 20s who's, he's fallen down the rankings because he's been injured. But I mean, it wasn't that long ago. He was in the top 10, top 5. He won a major not that long ago. He had a very, very, volatile 2021 in which he was in the news a lot. He brought a lot of value, a lot of attention, negative or positive. He is a needle mover for the tour. And frankly, I think he is a good example of sort of why we are in this position. DeChambeau is a guy who makes, he has a lot of inroads. He's somewhat polarizing. People are mesmerized by his technique, the weight gain, the muscle gain, the hitting it far. There's a lot of people that don't like him, but either way, he brings a lot of value to the PGA Tour. This year, he's been injured. He's barely made a penny. Does a guy who brings that kind of value to the PGA Tour deserve to not get anything? Now, listen, whether or not you or I believe that is one thing, but that is the thing that is out there that has led us down this road. Several years ago, when all this rival tour stuff came up, a bunch of agents and players were on board with this notion that, hey, the needle movers are basically subsidizing the rank and file. But at the end of the day, when Thursday starts, I have to beat that guy to get paid. And while that's fine in terms of the purse, if I don't do anything, I get zero. Right. And one agent said to me, a movie star like Tom Cruise doesn't sign up for a movie and, wait to see how he does at the end of it with ticket sales to get paid. He's getting a certain amount based on what he has already brought. He's paid based on his value and the thought that he's going to bring more value. In golf, it doesn't work that way. DeChambeau's a perfect example of that this year. You could make the argument that the needle movers, however you determine it, deserve some base amount to start every year, regardless of how they perform. And the tour has never really addressed that, gotten there. I'm not saying it's easy. I've had this kind of wild idea that why not give the top or the regular 25 events on the tour, not the playoff events, not the players, not the majors, not the WGCs, not the Memorials and Genesis and Arnold Palmer, but the other ones, the ones that are just your normal tournaments, New Orleans, Valspar, Honda, what have you. Give them each $5 million and tell them they can spend it however they want on player acquisition. So that is paying for their value. Let's say the John Deere Classic went to Tiger and said, we're going to give you $5 million to play in our tournament. Just give it all to him. Maybe they decide they give 2.5 to Tiger, 2.5 to Phil. Maybe they give $1 million to 5 guys. Maybe they give 500,000 to 10. Maybe they split it up. But the bottom line is you're getting paid to come there and bring them value. Now, of course, my idea requires them to come up with $125 million. But, I think if they had put something like that in place, we wouldn't be talking about Live Golf right now. It wouldn't have happened because the players would have been satisfied that the purses would continue to rise, that the stars would be taken care of. They could maybe up the amount they give to anybody who has a tour card. Basically, if you play 15 events, you get $50,000. That's kind of a drop in the bucket. Make it 100. Figure out a way to come up with that money, and this never gets off the ground. Now it's spiraled. I mean, $100+ million to sign on. The tour can't compete with that, nor should they be expected to. That's ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about a vast, almost an endless pit of money that the PIF, the Saudi Investment Fund, can throw at this. So, and here we are. And Bryson to me is a great example, and that really stinks for the PGA Tour to not have him now.
Yeah, and just as one point of comparison or contrast, the money that Dustin Johnson got usurps by a few million the entire on-course career earnings of Tiger Woods. And that was just the signing bonus. Friends, you're tuning into the Spicer Speaking podcast. My guest coming to us from Brookline, Massachusetts, site of this week's 122nd playing of the U.S. Open. It's SI.com's Bob Harig. I also get his work sent right to my inbox every day via Morning Read. He's also the author of a new book, just came out in April, well-timed, Tiger and Phil, Golf's Most Fascinating Rivalry. Let's segue to what's going to happen this week, or what we think might happen at this week. In the U.S. Open field, Bob, I believe that there are 12 individuals who played in the Live event last week. Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson, Louis Oosthuizen, perhaps foremost among those. This isn't just outside of Boston, man. This is not a golf tournament in a more genteel community, if you will. You think it might get ugly this week from a fan perspective?
It could.
Yeah.
I mean, it got very ugly here in 1999 at the Ryder Cup. The behavior crossed the line. And as we've seen with, in other sports, you hear these stories. It just happened in the NBA. Was it Draymond Green? I think it was with the Warriors, put up with some grief.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a difference between heckling and, getting ugly.
Yeah.
And in golf, you're very close to the players. And, I understand all the angst that people might have towards these guys. But, the bottom line is that would be very, very unfortunate. I don't think we want to see that. There's other ways to make your ire known. These guys are allowed to play. In fact, I think it would be wrong if they're ever not allowed to play in the majors. We might not like what they're doing, but the bottom line is they haven't broken any laws. They've elected to go play somewhere else. Yes, it's controversial, but if you're qualified, you're qualified. That's the great thing about golf. It's probably the bad thing about the Live Golf thing is it's not really open. They're going to pick off the top guys based on their marquee value, and then they're going to have kind of a nebulous way of getting into fields that are, not all that clear. Whereas, the U.S. Open, the Open next month, there's a clear path into those tournaments, and there's lots of ways to get in. So I hope that doesn't change. This week, this is a great venue, the Country Club, great history in the game. It's 3 U.S. Opens. Each one's had a playoff. Obviously the Ryder Cup. I hope we can get it back to that once Thursday rolls around.
Yeah, I hope so too, man. Certainly not condoning any behavior that goes past the line. Hey, if these guys, if there's some vitriol toward them, if they are lustily booed in a sporting atmosphere, so be it. And let's just hope that it stays at that. I guess going from ire to some degree of contempt or competition. I mean, what we saw on Sunday at the RBC, before even Rory got his jab in after his win and kind of spoke to it, that there was indeed some extra motivation, and they were playing like it. We almost saw 59 yesterday. We saw some brilliant rounds from Rory, Justin Rose, Tony Finau, and beyond. As we get into the U.S. Open, do you sense that these players, certainly the top players, may have an extra kind of head-to-head motivation to beat those guys, to beat the guys that defected to live?
It's funny, it hadn't really occurred to me until that happened yesterday. I mean, certainly these guys want to win regardless, but I think there is a little bit of animosity now. This is upsetting the golf ecosystem. It's not going to be simple. It's not going to get resolved soon. And basically now what's happened is these guys have assured that some of the top players in the world will not be able to compete with the other top players all the time outside of the majors. And we had gotten to a point where that would happen a decent number of times a year. Now, and the more guys that jump over there, the less that can happen based on, Jay Monahan's assertion that you won't be able to play PGA Tour events. And I'm not saying he's wrong about that. I think, he's probably got to put his foot down. He's got to show that there's some sort of a danger in making this move because you might not be welcome back. So I agree. I think there could be a little bit of venom and a little bit of, extra motivation. But on the other hand, I guess I would say is what last week was sort of, we don't have enough of that. And that's where the Live Golf and the PGL, that's where they thrive. There are holes in the golf schedule that are just kind of bland, and they have exploited that. And their intention is not to play against the Canadian Open, but they will be playing against some lesser light PGA Tour events going forward. And if they were able to get some wide exposure, it'll be interesting to see who watches what.
Yeah. And exactly where they're going to watch it. I'm not on the streaming service or the internet. A couple more for you today, Bob, before you go start your U.S. Open coverage this week. You mentioned the country club. We could do an entire program on the history, as I recommended last week, the greatest game ever played. You're going to want to go read that, then go watch the movie, and then add that to your Bob Harig reading this week. A lot of USGA events. We've had the Ryder Cup back in '99, a thrilling one at that. But US Open, we're going all the way back to 1988 when Curtis Strange won in one of the aforementioned playoffs, taking down Nick Faldo. But they were just at 6 under when they were getting there.
Right.
Course has undergone some Gil Hanse restorations. They're doing some switching of their 27 holes to make a championship play this week. But like a lot of US Opens, from what I'm sensing, driving accuracy, strong putting on very, very small classic style of greens. That looks like a good recipe this week. I don't know. What are you sensing for how this course is going to play?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's it doesn't look like it's going to be all that fun if you hit it into the rough, if you miss greens. Obviously those who are chipping well are going to be a good bet because you just are not going to hit a lot of greens. It's just inherent at a US Open. The guy that can hit 12, 14, 15 greens in a round, that's a guy who's going to have a great chance. I mean, if you are two putting it to death for pars and throw in the occasional birdie, you're going to have a very good week, I think. And that's maybe sort of obvious, but at a lot of tour events, hitting a lot of greens doesn't necessarily matter if you're not converting them. Here, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, if you can shoot 1 or 2 under, or even hang around par, well, obviously it's going to be a lot easier to do that if you're hitting the greens and not having to chip and save par. And clearly, when that happens, then you're having to make 5 and 6 and 8 footers to save par. It's stressful. So it should be fun. I hope it stays dry. It always makes these tournaments much better if it's firm and fast.
Yeah, ask you lastly today, Bob. Tiger and Phil, golf's most fascinating rivalry, came out just a couple months ago. Could there have been a better time for your book to have could you have asked for better timing for your book's release?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I know in that, they're still relevant. And I'm not sure I saw that coming when I finished up the book at the end of 2021. We had no idea what Tiger was going to be doing. We didn't know if he'd be coming back anytime soon. We certainly didn't think so. And, Phil was not playing great at the end of last year. He had won the PGA, which gave me a great chapter to include in the book. But, you kind of got the sense that maybe it was time that he was moving on. Well, here we are. Tiger was back at the first two majors. Phil wasn't. Phil's been in the news constantly the last couple of months. So from that standpoint, the timing's been terrific. From the standpoint of loving to include that in the book, not so terrific. I need another chapter or two. I need a paperback version to add another chapter to, because look, they're on opposite sides of this. It shows the rivalry again. I mean, Tiger, I sense he's very calm about it, but I have sense he is incensed at Phil for this. Deep down, he is mad that Phil's doing this, that he's dumping on the PGA Tour in this manner. And yet, from Phil's perspective, Tiger would have had some of the same gripes. He just wouldn't have handled it this way. Tiger, of all the guys who's been undervalued, it's Tiger Woods. He should have got a cut of the TV deals. He should have been, every tournament should have been able to give him $1 million just to show up. I realize that's not that easy, but that's what he brings. And he wasn't getting that. Now, Tiger is making so much money. My guess is you would never make something like that public. But behind the scenes, I'm sure him and his representatives wondered why. I show up at the first tee on Thursday. I sold all these tickets. And if I don't beat this guy that I'm teeing off with, he's going to make more money than me. That doesn't, so they're still relevant. I think I got plenty to add if they let me write another chapter for the paperback version.
Well, I just ordered my copy over this weekend pass. I look forward to the chapters that are existing, adding that to my summer reading list. Again, the new book from Bob Harig, Tiger and Phil, Golf's Most Fascinating Rivalry. Order that. Again, add it to your summer reading list. And this week ahead, and for the rest of the golf season, don't forget to check out Bob Harig's work on si.com/morningread. I get mine delivered right to my inbox every morning. Follow his impressions this week for the 122nd playing of the U.S. Open at Bob Harig on Twitter. Bob, I know you got a lot going on this week. Thank you so much for joining the Spicer Speaking podcast. Appreciate your time, man.
Glad to do it. Thank you for having me. Have a great week.
Too, man.
Okay.